Hello, everyone. My name is Avi Benmordechai. I am a clinical therapist, and today I will be talking to you about exposure therapy, but more specifically, the fear of animals and overcoming the challenges that arise with that. This is something that's going to be extraordinary for you to experience if you are someone who has a fear of any type of animal or any type of a situation that you're afraid of. So I prepared a bunch of stuff to talk about today. Hopefully, we are going to be able to get through all of it. Also, thanks to everyone who sent all the questions. I will try my best to get to as much of them as possible. So let's start off. Little self-disclosure, this is one of my favorite things to work on in session with my clients. So I have a private practice called Center One Therapy, and I do various different types of therapy for different types of things. Usually in the community, I'm known as the guy with all the therapy animals. That's just one of the tools I use, right? So think of it as a toolbox. Happens to be, it's one of the most popular tools that I use, but dealing with depression, anxiety, OCD, trauma, and different types of challenges that people experience. One of the most common things that I see in my practice is people of all ages, children, teens, adults, males, females, everybody who struggles with this. And there's definitely a lot of embarrassment that's attached to it, especially when working with adults. And this is something that I hear quite often, people saying, I'm so embarrassed that I scream whenever I see an animal in the room, or I go to my friend's house and I have to run out and I'm so embarrassed that people are looking at me. Here I am, an adult, and I lose control, right? So the interesting part of this whole process is gaining back control. And part of my assessment when I work with clients, I ask them, one of the questions are you someone who likes to be controlled? And usually the response is no, I want to be in control. I want to be the boss. And that's when I tell them, then you're the right candidate for this type of work, because exposure therapy is about taking back your power. Because think of it this way. If a dog is in the room and you can't go into that room because of the dog, guess who's in control? You are the dog, right? So exposure therapy is about gaining control over your life and being able to walk into the room feeling content, not necessarily having to love the animal that you're with, but completely being not bothered. So let's go through step by step of how this works. So typically, there are two reasons why, most of the time, why people are experiencing a fear of animals. Either, number one, it's a trauma that happened to them. Maybe the dog chased them, or a cat jumped on them, and then they got really afraid, and every single time they saw the animal, that flashback came into their mind, and from there on, it was never reprocessed, and because of that, they carried this with them for such a long period of time. The second reason is usually it's from a phobia. Someone in their life, maybe a parent, maybe a friend, maybe a neighbor, someone in their life had a fear, and whenever they would, let's say, would cross the street and they would see an animal, they would pull the child away and say, no, don't go there, the dog will bite you, or don't touch the dog, or they would feel startled. And that was one of the ways that also made the person now be afraid of the animal. So when I work with my clients, I usually ask them, is this something that happened to you, or is this something that happened, or was somebody in your life afraid, and because of that, you are now afraid as well? So once we kind of come up with the answer, we kind of work from there. Usually, we want to try to understand how this is affecting a person, right? So how do you know if therapy is for you? Why do you have to go to therapy, right? Do you need exposure therapy? Do you have to overcome your fear? Think of it this way. If it's affecting your activities of daily living, which means you're late to work because you have to go down 6 flights of stairs and you can't go into the elevator because you might have a dog coming in there, or you are always so afraid to walk on the sidewalk because your area has so many animals there, or you work in somebody's house and they have an animal there, or you can't go on vacation or to the beach because there are birds flying and you're so afraid of that. So if it's affecting your activities of daily living, that's a sign that it's time to get some help. Now, we're going to be talking about a few different types of ways of overcoming this. And the first and most important thing is it's really important to understand that you have to work with a proper therapist who is trained in this specifically, because there's a lot of information that is out there about exposure therapy, and I meet with a lot of people who tell me I've been to therapy before, we've looked at some pictures, we watched some videos, but that's it, right? And it never really kind of helped. So this is very important to recognize that this is something that is going to be needed to actually allow yourself to be in a space where you're going to work with a specific animal. Of course, I do not believe in flooding. Flooding is kind of having the person in your office, taking the dog, kind of throwing it into the room and letting the person panic. I'm not about that, and that's not my style of working. My number one rule in my office is safety. Safety is key. In order for this type of therapy to work, the client has to trust the therapist. No surprises, right? So my style of working with the client is step by step, understanding their history, understanding what scares them, and really getting them to feel like they're safe in the room. They may feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. This is a very important piece to understand about exposure therapy. This is not a comfortable process. In order for behavior to change, specifically the fear, let's say overcoming your fear of dogs, overcoming your fear of driving on the highway, or overcoming your fear of public speaking, you have to allow the anxiety to come up there. Now, the benefit of doing this with a skilled therapist, because the therapist can kind of balance and see, okay, what's really going on here? Should we do a mindfulness exercise? Should we do some deep breathing? Should we take a moment and reflect what's going on here, right? Getting in touch with the room and the environment. Because oftentimes when a person is in a state of anxiety or panic, what happens? Fight, flight, or freeze, right? They want to leave the room because they want to get to safety. This is another piece that I tell my clients, is that the reason why your brain is doing this is to protect you, right? Your brain is working properly. Your brain is there to make sure you're comfortable all the time. So if you're not comfortable, and if there's a dog there, or a cat, or a spider, or a cockroach, right? Your brain is telling you, I'm uncomfortable, get out of here as fast as possible. But that's not always the best thing for us, right? So that's also a whole process that I work with my clients to kind of be able to get in touch with those thoughts and feelings. Just because we want to do something doesn't necessarily mean that's the best thing for us. So talking about exposure therapy, I wouldn't necessarily recommend somebody going up to any dog to see how that's going to work for them. Because in my office, this is a really important point, I tell my clients, when you come here and want to work on exposure therapy, you're going to be learning a completely different language depending on the animal we're working with. So for example, if let's say we're working on exposure therapy, fear of dogs, overcoming your fear of dogs. Number one, think of anxiety, right? Anxiety is the fear of unknown. Oftentimes, if a person sees my dog on a leash, what's the automatic thought? That dog is going to attack me. That dog is going to jump on me. That dog is his eyes are looking at me, right? I can see the mouth. I can see the teeth. And that fear comes up for them, and they just created a whole story in their head that doesn't even exist. Right? So this is something that I work through with them. In the room, they feel safe, and they know that all my animals that I have in my practice are hand selected. And I actually have someone here with me today for you guys. Are you guys ready to see who I brought with me? I was thinking, which animal can I bring to show you as a visual aid, to make it exciting. So the smallest animal I could think of that I had in my practice, which is actually one of the most popular, is Charlotte. Take a look right here. This is Charlotte. She is a red knee tarantula. Now, when people hear about tarantulas, they usually, most of the time, freak out, right? Why do they freak out? Why do they get scared? Because a lot of people don't have enough information about it, right? Oftentimes people will tell me, yeah, but she's poisonous. She's going to hurt me. She's going to attack me. She's going to, bite me. But really, that's the farthest from the truth, because look at this. She is actually the sweetest girl ever. Take a look. And she's a red knee tarantula. She doesn't really move very fast. She's definitely alive, right? And she comes all the way from Mexico. And one of the biggest fears in the world is arachnophobia, right? Fear of spiders. And this is something this is a tarantula that I use in session to help people deal with their fear. Or another reason why I use it also is to connect with people and talk about really the beauty of the creature. And when we talk about mindfulness, actually pay attention. Oftentimes what happens with people is that you kind of close off your mind to accept new information. Think of anxiety as a cloud. Anxiety comes, but it also passes, right? So allow that feeling to pass, allow that feeling to go away, and you will see that you will naturally become calmer, right? Even watching this video, if you're afraid of spiders and you looked at this the first second, you might have jumped back or freaked out, right? But if you're continuing to watch the video, you're thinking to yourself like, oh, she's not that bad, right? She's pretty chill. She's pretty calm. She's actually she's really beautiful, right? So this is how anxiety works. Allowing yourself to stay in that uncomfortable space and really build resilience. And doing that with a trained professional can absolutely help the process, because oftentimes what I see is when a client wants to give up and says, this is too much for me, right? Or, I can't do it, right? Or get it away from me. My job there is to kind of hold there for a second and say, is that what you really want? Or is that what your brain is telling you? Can we hold it for another 2 seconds? Can we try to take a deep breath to kind of ground the individual there so it's a nice and secure space and the client is able to work on reprocessing the trauma that happened with them in their life. And of course, I would also want to make sure I set realistic goals. Sometimes when I get calls, people will say, how long will it take for me to overcome my fear? First of all, I will tell you, and this is the honest truth, I've had so much experience with helping people of all ages. This is a short-term type of therapy. It's not long-term. Usually within the first session, people, most 99.999% of the time, they see a major transformation within the first session. And I actually tell them to take their phone out, to video themselves and take a picture of themselves, because in that moment, the person is in a state of shock. They're like, how in the world was I able to do this just now? By the way, my background is also in hypnosis. I also am trained in EMDR. So I kind of use my toolbox to be able to help the person get rid of this fear for once and for all. And even in the first session, it's very possible to do that. And as a therapist, for someone who works with people, we understand that therapy takes time, right? But, and it really depends on the person. But with this specific technique and strategy with exposure therapy, it's one of the most rewarding feelings for me as a therapist, because I'm able to see within 45 minutes a person's life beginning to transform. And oftentimes the client is shocked that they're able to do that. And it gives them a sense of self-confidence, a boost. And then I get calls or texts saying, hey, do you know that because I, held the spider, or because I was able to do the session with you yesterday, touching the dog, I was able to be so successful at work, or I was able to speak to my boss and confront him about something that happened. So it kind of gives you a sense of self-confidence, or able to drive on the highway, or do something that maybe they were not able to do before. So this is such an incredible and empowering exercise to do with the brain. But what I will say is it's important to also be patient, right? Because sometimes they'll come into that session, right? They'll do such a good job. Within 45 minutes, they're on a high. They're like, I can't believe I accomplished so much. And once they leave the office and all of a sudden they see a dog and they freak out again, right? And what do they think? This is not working, right? It's really important to be patient with your brain. Because think of it this way. You've been carrying all this trauma for such a long time. We got to heal that inner child. That's what it is. Oftentimes when I'll speak to a person who's in their 30s or 40s and they'll tell me, I'm so embarrassed. I can't believe I'm an adult and I'm dealing with this. I scream like a little baby. So I'll tell them, how old were you when this situation happened to you? They'll say, I was 6 or 7 years old. I'll tell them, okay, do me a favor. We're going to be, you and I, you, the 30-year-old or 40-year-old, and I, the therapist, we're going to be working with that 5-year-old girl or that 5-year-old boy. And we're going to kind of hold their hand and guide them through this process. Because in reality, when that screaming or yelling happens, it's not the adult. It's that inner trapped child that's still there saying, please help me. I'm afraid. I needed someone to protect me at that moment in my life, but that person wasn't there and I need your help. And that's what we do in session. So, of course, it's important to be patient with yourself. I also notice a lot of the times people are really hard on themselves. They are their number one critics. Even the smallest thing. And for me, it's huge that, a person was afraid and now is taking a step towards the right direction. Just the fact that they're willing to come to therapy and overcome their fear, that is major. That is major stuff. That takes so much courage. And the fact that you were able to do that, talk to yourself nicely also. That's extremely important in this whole journey. What I will say also is, when working with people in this journey, it's really important to recognize that it's going to take some time and also be a life-changing situation for you to the better. And it's going to be sometimes anxiety provoking. And that's when the change happens in your brain. You should feel safe, but it's not a comfortable experience. That's what I'll tell you. Okay, moving forward, I would say, and this is how I start, right? I'll work with a person by creating a hierarchy, trying to figure out what are they afraid of the most, right? And try to figure out what are they afraid of the least, and figure out how to work our way up. Definitely baby steps. Like I said before, I'm not about flooding, and I definitely want establishing rapport and making the client trust me is key. In order for this to work properly, trust is really important. Next, we want to be able to, once the person does the therapy and they're able to overcome their fear, they oftentimes ask me, will this last? How do I know that I'm going to be able to overcome it? How for good, right? It's with practice. Exposure therapy is allowing yourself to get closer and closer to the stimuli that makes you afraid. So when you do that over and over again for, let's say, a period of 5 weeks or 6 weeks, right? And then you just stop, sometimes you can go back. So it's really important that you focus and you try your best to make it part of your homework. Whether I'll tell people if they're afraid of, let's say, a cockroach, right? Or a tarantula, I'll tell them, well, let's print out a picture and put it in your purse. Put it on your phone screen. Take a picture of it and put it on your fridge and give this cockroach a name and really give it a personality, right? Tell you what it reminds you of. So this way they kind of build that a connection with it. And through that, you can't even imagine how you have the power to change negative and unwanted behaviors. Okay, moving forward. I got a bunch of questions from you guys. I'm going to try my best to answer them as much as I can. All right, here we go. You ready? I have been chased and bitten by a dog once, and I'm terrified of dogs since. Even little puppies. How can I overcome it? Very good. Good question. You have to understand, the fear is not in your conscious mind. Yes, consciously, if somebody were to tell you, here, touch this dog. It's a white, cute, fluffy little puppy. Touch it. Consciously, you understand that. right? But your subconscious mind is so much stronger, and that fight or flight response is going to kick in, and you're not going to be able to do it. It's very, very difficult. That's why it's understandable that you get scared by even a little dog. Sometimes, this is the calls that I get, is that people say, this is the worst fear. I can imagine you've never, ever, ever dealt with this before. You never had this situation. I'm telling you, my situation is really, really bad. And part of my job is to kind of reassure them and say, look, it's understandable that it feels so overwhelming that you're not going to be able to handle this and you won't be able to work on it, but you absolutely can. That's also part of the anxiety. And I reiterate oftentimes after I hang up the phone with the initial, consultation, I say to them, once I hang up the phone, you may second guess yourself and you may want to cancel the session. You know why? Because anxiety is what creates a story in your mind. What does anxiety do? It says, wait, I just set up a session, but if I'm going to go to his house, his office, which my office is connected to my house because the animals need to be supervised 24/7. So if I go to his office, the dog is going to jump on me and it's going to attack me. Yeah, this is too much for me. And they're going to cancel the appointment, right? This is why I say, when you come in, there are no animals there. You are 100% safe. We get to do an assessment and we take it from there. Because a lot of the times in gut anxiety, that's just what it does. It creates stories that are not there. So it's understandable that you would be afraid of that little dog. And doing exposure therapy can absolutely help. And don't feel embarrassed because I totally get it. It doesn't make sense. But when you come and speak to a therapist about it, we can try to understand what happened to you that's causing you to behave this way. Next question. Hi, I do not have a fear of animals. I actually love them. I just have a crazy fear of roaches. Does that even make sense? And how do I get over this fear? I literally moved out of 2 apartments because of roaches. Honestly, let's be realistic also. It is kind of creepy. Imagine you're eating something or folding your laundry and all of a sudden out of nowhere a bug just pops out. Yeah, it'll startle anyone. I love animals. It'll startle me too. So let's normalize that for just a moment, okay? But with that said, there's a difference. If you had to move out of your apartment twice, that's when you know, okay, it's time to get some help and how to manage it. There's definitely things you can do. My goal for my clients is not for them to become best friends with roaches, right? But not to feel so afraid to the point where they have to run out of the house and get somebody else to come in. So, and also we can talk about exterminators. We can talk about what to do in certain situations like that to feel safe, right? And also information. Understanding animal body language, right? Which animals, can hurt you and which animals are harmless. And even with dogs or cats or even snakes, understanding what is their body language saying. Are they in a state that they would hurt me or harm me? Do they want to be left alone? Do they appear friendly? This is all the things that we talk about in session. And when I tell my clients, you will learn a different language, that's what I mean. Ready for another one? Here we go. Is it really possible to get over the fear of all animals? I'm not talking regular fear. I mean like petrified on a whole other level. Also, just the thought of addressing it causes intense panic. Does that mean I can't work on it? That doesn't mean you can't work on it. That is so normal. Think of it this way. When you pick up the phone and you call the therapist to say, hey, can I please set up a session? You're unlocking like a file cabinet that you tucked away for such a long time. And here you are confronting it. Of course, that's scary. That's very scary. But remember this, when you're working with someone who's trained in this, they will make you feel comfortable and they will make sure that all your questions are answered. There's no such thing as stupid questions. I really mean it, because we want to understand how our brain works. Remember that your brain is built to protect you. That's why your brain is doing this. But sometimes you got to tell your brain, like, hey, buddy, take a back seat, right? You're doing too much. You're being extra, right? And you kind of want to live in the gray area. It's not white or black. Just kind of live in that area, because think of it this way. Stress of an animal attacking you, the anxiety of it is also a good thing. I wouldn't recommend somebody go to the Bronx Zoo and jump into the lion's cage and say, oh, I'm doing some exposure therapy. That's not safe, right? I love animals, but I wouldn't walk up to any animal and just start petting them because I have to first ask the owner. And this is also what I teach my clients. I'll use your words. When a person is in a state of anxiety, a lot of the times I see them shutting down. They freeze up. They're not able to use their words. Even tell a person, if they're in an elevator, say, excuse me, sir, can you please move your dog away? Right? They start to shake. They start to panic. So empowering my clients to say, use your words and tell the person to put the dog on a leash, because that's the law, right? So if you're feeling intense panic, first of all, I would also say, let's do some deep breathing. I'm not your therapist at this point, but allowing yourself to ground your thoughts, even tell the therapist on the phone, hey, I'm feeling a little bit nervous having this conversation, and they'll guide you through it. And it is possible. It's definitely very possible to overcome your fear. If you can't see my passion through this video, guys, I'm telling you, it is so possible. So if you're watching this and you feel trapped because you have this intense fear that you've been carrying with you, I promise you, you can overcome it. Next question. How can exposure therapy change how I feel about animals, even if I've had this fear for as long as I can remember? This is what I tell a lot of my clients. My goal as a therapist is not to make you fall in love with these animals. The goal is for you to be able to tolerate animals. So if you go to your friend's house and you're eating dinner and the dog is running around, you should be able to continue eating dinner without having to panic. Happens to be a lot of my clients end up falling in love with animals and then buy their own. Next question. Can exposure therapy be done on my own? Technically, yes, it can be. It's much better done with a therapist, because oftentimes when you get, uncomfortable, you may just want to run away. And working with a skilled therapist, they're able to challenge you in a proper way and give you enough information, the proper information you need. Will exposure therapy make my fear worse initially? I wouldn't say worse. I would say within the session, anxiety will come up. But again, working with a proper therapist, you're safe in that space. You're uncomfortable, but safe, because that's really what your brain wants. Your brain wants you to be safe. Moving on. How long does exposure therapy take to work? It depends on the person, but again, it's usually short term. What if I experience a panic attack during exposure? That's a great question. Working with a therapist, they will be able to ground you in the session, in the middle of the session, and see like, hey, what thoughts are coming up for you, and reprocess that in the middle of the session. So this way, when you go outside and do some of the homework, you're going to be able to have the tools to ground you. Next, can exposure therapy help with other anxieties besides animal phobias? Absolutely. I find that people who do exposure therapy and to overcome their fear of animals definitely also feel empowered in other areas of their life. What if exposure therapy doesn't work for me? I would say explore that further with your therapist. I've never had a situation with someone that it doesn't work. And if it didn't work, clearly something is going on there that needs to be explored further. Moving on. I'm terrified of dogs, and even seeing one on TV makes me anxious. How does exposure therapy address this level of fear? Totally understandable. You would have to just take smaller steps with your therapist, but it's definitely possible. No judgment at all. I avoided situations with my fear for years. How can exposure therapy help me face these situations without feeling overwhelmed? This is an overwhelming process. There's a lot to take in. So understand that exposure therapy is work. A lot of my clients, when they leave my office, they feel like they went to the gym. You're not lifting weights, but you're doing mental work. And mental work oftentimes is a lot more than physical work. So recognize that whoever goes into exposure therapy, yes, you're safe, but it takes a lot of courage. And guess what? What's the payoff? Why would you be interested in doing this? Because you're going to get your life back. You're going to be able to live a life of freedom, a life of being at peace and being in control. This was so incredible. We have a whole bunch more questions I wasn't able to get to, but feel free to message me on Instagram or check out my website, center1therapy.com. I am so glad to have been able to have this opportunity to talk with you guys. Looking forward to connecting once again. Be well, everyone, and good luck.